This is part of our study of the Lotus 11 racing sports car, today focusing on the club model. From its introduction in early 1956, the Lotus 11 took the racing world by storm. As a scientifically designed car, engineered to minimize mass and weight, the 11 dominated its class in road racing for years and helped steer the future of racing car design. The Le Mans version of the 11 took most of the headlines, with hundreds of race wins, but the club version, using a live axle and drum brakes, contributed to this success and helped make Lotus a profitable company. Only 24 Club 11s were made, starting with the one built by Jabby Cronbach in the earliest days at the Lotus shop in Hornsey, North London. Another early one was sold as a kit to John Harris, who completed it so well that Lotus hired him as a fabricator. Peter Ross, one of the engineers who helped Colin Chapman with the design, bought a sports model at cost, immediately converting it to the club spec to race around Europe. Most clubs had the windscreen shown here, with San Francisco Lotus distributor Bill Breeze behind the wheel. Here is the same car later with a head fairing, custom made for a tall driver. This club raced in Hawaii with Hap Allen. Another at Watkins Glen with Bob Bucher. At Lime Rock, a club was being raced by a team calling itself North American Team Lotus, one of its drivers being CBS newsman Walter Cronkite, later the most trusted man in America. At the same time in New York City, this Club 11, built at Lotus as a road car, was parked at curbside in an effort to find a buyer. Half of club production was being exported to the USA, and Lotus had advertised it as being eligible for SCCA production car racing, even though it wasn't. With unsold inventory piling up and the pressure on, Jay Chamberlain took one of these clubs from his dealer lot in Southern California to begin the model's most eventful episode. It was entered in an SCCA race event as a production car, something that could change Lotus fortunes if it succeeded. For months, Chamberlain and another man who sold and raced 11s, J.C. Kilburn, had lobbied the SCCA from different sides of the country to allow the Club 11 to race in a production category, rather than the modified class. They falsely argued that hundreds had been built, and with a live axle and drum brakes, a club could fairly compete with Triumphs and MGs. The SCCA gave them tentative approval. This could have been a game changer for Lotus, following the examples of the Le Mans model dominating the G modifieds, and the sports model in the UK essentially taking over a race class. With Club 11s from their stocks, Chamberlain and Kilburn faced off on several tracks in the southeast USA. These skilled and fiercely competitive racers refused to give the other an easy win. Their two Club 11s would battle for the lead, far, far ahead of the rest of the production car fields. Afterwards, other drivers immediately filed protests at the outrageous inequity of a 900-pound, handmade sports racer competing with actual production cars, weighing nearly twice as much. The SCCA quickly pulled the plug and moved the club back to the modifieds, while Chamberlain and Kilburn blamed each other for driving too fast. Undeterred, Kilburn continued racing his club against the modified cars. With his car painted in the royal racing colors of Morocco, against cars that should have been faster, he often won. Even today, at least one Club 11 continues the fight. For a close-up look at a Club 11, let's go back to this one, in street trim, since it exists today, restored to 1957 condition. All Lotus 11s were right-hand drive and had room for two. Instrumentation was spread across the dash with a fuse box at far left and switchgear from a T-Series MG in the center. Deep underneath the cowl, the pedals were squeezed into a box for slender feet. The clutch pedal had a direct link into the transmission. 11s had doors to meet competition rules, but these were almost useless except for the map pockets. We will come back to them in a moment. The alloy transmission tunnel supports the floor and in this case houses an MGA gearbox, a bulletproof but heavy unit, more often fitted to large displacement and long-distance racing 11s. Oddly, these went into several clubs too, while most 11s used a lightweight Austin gearbox. Under the bonnet we find the engine the Lotus 11 was designed around, a Coventry Climax FWA, a 4-cylinder overhead cam design with aluminum block and head. Twin SU carbs were most commonly fitted. This 1100cc is the original one for this car, and in Stage 3 tune has a peak of about 85 horsepower. Plenty in a car that weighs 900 pounds. At the wheels we see part of what makes this a club. Instead of disc brakes, we have the drums from a Triumph TR2, with twin leading shoe internal components from an Austin Cambridge. The ducted radiator was Frank Costin's idea, where air is pulled through by low pressure beneath the car. We have the ingenious Lotus swing axle front suspension, and behind that a Morris Minor rack and pinion. Everything is mounted low and compactly as possible, inside the steel space frame chassis, which itself weighs only 56 pounds. Other than the modern hoses, this engine bay looks as it would have in '57. The twin-circuit brake system is common sense racing practice. But note how close the steering column comes to the engine, a drawback from packing so much into a small space. The cable coming off the end of the generator is the tachometer drive. The street windscreen was standard on this particular car, but many 11s once had them as an optional spare. They were seldom used and very few have survived. The door shapes on this car are also unusual, a style found on fewer than 10 cars, mainly clubs. The tops of the doors are a few inches lower than standard, with flares reaching up to the tail. This treatment was only for the full width and street windscreens. These snaps are for the side curtains this car once had. When closed, this door style provided a slightly wider space for driver and passenger. With the Terry springs released, we can open the tail and see what else is inside. Instead of the De Dion rear suspension, magnesium differential case, and inboard discs of the Le Mans, we find a less expensive live axle with drum brakes. These were sourced from the Austin Metropolitan, with special brackets to allow use of the same control arms, springs, and dampers as the Le Mans. Although this axle has higher unsprung weight and power delivery is less efficient, it does have a better e-brake, with the handle up under the dash on the passenger side. Drum brakes and a live axle are all of what made a club different from a full race 11 Le Mans. While we're here, there is something else to see. Although fabric tops or hoods could be fitted to competition windscreens, as on this Sebring 11, on this car we have one in street configuration. There is actually room inside for 2 adults to hold their heads upright. Hoods were once popular options on 11s, but hardly any exist today. So let's see how one goes together. Very quick and simple. Thank goodness it wasn't raining. But how does one get into a Lotus 11 with the hood up? First, here's the normal procedure for climbing in. With the top up, the process is much more involved. Right. Here's a typical startup. The key starts the fuel pump. On this day, a part was missing from the tachometer drive, so it will stay at 0. However, the ancient chronometric speedometer will read accurately. We will stay within the speed limit. Lotus built 11s not just to win races, but to sell as many as possible, and the club was part of some clever marketing. As an entry-level race car, the club was priced in the UK at just over £1,600 British with tax, less if purchased as a kit. In the USA, after freight and distributor profit, the price was over $4,700 before tax. In 1957, that was more than a Chevrolet Corvette. But with the Club 11, a person could drive to a track, immediately go racing, and drive back home again. Lotus offered a conversion kit to turn it into a Le Mans later, when the owner was ready to go all out. The changeover could be done with basic tools in a single afternoon. There was the implied opportunity for an enthusiast on a sensible budget to use a club for daily transport, with occasional race outings, as some Lotus engineers and employees were already doing. So, what's it like on the road? At legal speeds, an 11 requires only a light touch on the steering wheel, and the biggest challenge is adjusting to how sensitive it is. The ride is relatively soft compared to sports cars of its day, and the brakes feel powerful, being designed for much heavier cars. The handling is unlike just about any road car experience, like a modern racing kart, only with less effort. There's normally no need to slow down for turns. Even with the big windscreen, the Lotus is so aerodynamic that there seems to be no resistance, and it glides along like every road is downhill. To people 60 plus years ago, the experience must have felt phenomenal. Of course, it was never ideal for an urban commute. The driver has a good view of the bottoms of other people's door handles, but they can't see the Lotus. The best place to be in traffic, as in racing, is ahead of everyone else. With earplugs in place, away from crowds and in the right air, driving an 11 can actually be pleasant, the Climax engine humming like a sewing machine. Lotus has since sold many more models of racing cars for the road to lucky drivers who traded their money for those moments of pleasure behind the wheel.